So while I was preparing for what it was that I actually wanted to share with you guys today, I spent a lot of time thinking about what it is that I myself would have wanted to hear a few years ago when I was in high school. And I thought it was a very difficult challenge because at this time I only wanted to really just get into college. That's all I was really concerned with. And everything that I did in high school was very oriented around what could I do to increase my chances. So, I would talk to my guidance counselor, and the one piece of advice they would give you more than any is that you should be yourself. And that's what you should do on your college application, just be yourself. So I didn't know what that meant because as far as I was concerned, being myself meant getting straight A's. Being myself meant being the president of every possible club that I could have a leadership position in, and getting lots of awards. And it's funny because over time, I finally actually started to figure out what it actually meant to be yourself. And it took me a few years, and I'm still in progress, but I wanted to talk a little bit today about how I actually got to that. And just for some context, I run a community organization called Tea with Strangers. And what we do with Tea with Strangers, we bring strangers together for conversations called Tea Time. We have a community of people all over the country who host these 2-hour conversations where they talk about anything and everything. You never know who's actually going to be there, and you kind of just sit for the sake of understanding new people. But before Tea with Strangers existed, I did have to actually understand why that would actually matter. So the story kind of starts in elementary school. Oh, this is off. Cool. In elementary school, all I really wanted was to be cool. I did great in classes, but it wasn't really something that made me popular amongst the kids at school. So I tried focusing on what is it that the cool kids were actually doing. And they really shined in gym class. And it was in gym class that the cool kids, they'd get picked first for the basketball team, for the kickball team, and really the pinnacle of gym class was the fitness test. You would run a mile around the track, and whoever finished first, you kind of just got marked, and you did this every 6 months. And up until 8th grade, I could never finish the mile without having to walk. It was a very big problem for me, and naturally that meant I was not the first person finishing the mile. So I made it a personal mission of mine to get really fast at running the mile so that I could be one of the cool kids. I would start getting picked first for basketball and for kickball and whatnot. So there was a time at the end of 8th grade when we had a fitness test, and I'd spent 6 months just getting in shape. And when the mile test came around, I finished first by minutes. And I felt really, really good about it. I was patting myself on the back, and it turns out that I still wasn't getting picked first for the basketball team. I still wasn't getting picked first for kickball, and it didn't make me any cooler, which was confusing to me, but I went on and I got to high school. And in high school, it seemed that the only thing that actually mattered was getting into college. So I tossed fitness goals out of the window, and I started focusing on my grades. And I wanted to get a lot of awards. And I started noticing my freshman year that there was one day every single month when a lot of kids came into school with plaques and trophies, and it was always on a Monday, and they always dropped them right off into this display where they were celebrated for winning all these awards. And I was like, oh, what are you guys winning all these awards for? And they said, oh, we were just at Model Congress this past weekend, and these are all the debate awards. And I was like, oh, I like awards. So I joined Model Congress. And I had no idea what Model Congress was. I didn't even know it was debate club. I just knew that there were awards at the end of the tunnel. So I sought after these awards, and I went to Model Congress, and I figured I was a pretty good talker. So I thought I could win all these debate awards, and I didn't. For the first few Model Congress events I went to, I was not winning these awards, but I started paying attention to who was. Just the same way I was paying attention to who was cool in elementary school. They were running the fastest mile. But at Model Congress, the people that were winning the awards weren't the people who were running the fastest mile or people who necessarily even looked like they could finish a mile. Rather, it was people who were the most encouraging to every single person in the debate committee. They were the people who looked at the quiet kid and they said, hey, you should go talk. They're the people who actually celebrated everybody's individuality When somebody actually had a point to make that actually didn't agree with what everyone else thought, instead of saying, hey, that's a pretty stupid idea, as a matter of fact, they actually said, that's interesting, because I hadn't thought of that before. It was a community of people who actually were so oriented on allowing other people to be themselves, and that was so unlike anything that I had ever experienced in high school before. So it was kind of a beacon for people that in their own school environments were usually the weirdos. But in this environment, they weren't very weird at all. And this really changed the way that I saw my social environment in high school, and it made me think a lot more about how it is that people could come together and how they could actually be celebrated for who they are. So I brought this kind of spirit with me into college when I got there. And when I got to college, there we go. When I got to college, I thought, this is totally going to be like Model Congress. There's so many people here of very varying backgrounds and so much new perspective to actually understand. So when I got there, my sole intent was find people of completely different backgrounds and understand them. I wanted to connect a lot of people and be the person whose social circles expanded far and wide. But the college social environment didn't really lend itself very well to that. I found very, very quickly in college that there are some people that join fraternities, sororities, performing arts groups, cultural groups, their own debate societies, etc. And these debate societies actually didn't reward the people who were the most encouraging, but rather the people who were just the best debaters. And I found that in being somebody who was trying to bridge a lot of people, I wasn't actually getting anywhere because people didn't quite want to be bridged. But that all changed towards the end of college. At the end of my senior year, I started noticing that a lot of people started shedding these layers of identity. It didn't really matter so much that they were a part of a certain fraternity or a certain performing arts group or different cultural group. What actually just mattered is that they were about to graduate. So when they were about to graduate, people started opening up to each other and actually talking to each other when they had no reason to. And I kind of wanted to tap into that because I realized it was the first time in college that I actually felt that I was kind of seeing what I saw in Model Congress when I first got there 4 years earlier, or rather 7 years earlier. And in tapping into that, I made a very simple website called Let's Get Tea. And I thought maybe 5 or 10 people would sign up with a simple proposition. It was, if I don't know you yet, we can change that. Let's sit together for a conversation and have some tea. I posted it on my Facebook, and very, very quickly the next day, I saw that over 250 people had signed up. I was so mind blown. I was like, why do people actually want to sign up for this? But also, more importantly, how am I actually going to sit with 250 people? That's a lot of people. I had 6 weeks left, and what I did is for the last 6 weeks of college, I would sit at the same cafe for 3 hours every night. And I invited 6 people to sit together. I never knew who was actually going to be there. I just opened up 6 slots. And anyone who was actually going to be there also didn't know who was going to be there. And we would sit for 3 hours and we would talk. And there's a lot of room for awkwardness here, because you would think that people who had no reason to actually be sitting together would kind of be searching, scraping for something to actually create common ground amongst them. But it seemed really apparent very quickly that it wasn't all that awkward. And what started happening is that people would actually share stories about who they were and how they got to where they were, things that they were really excited about, things that made them who they were. And every single person's stories were actually really similar to the stories of the people around them. Not in content, but rather in their motivations. Their cultural assumptions were very similar. The things that they feared were very similar. Their ideas of, oh, everybody's doing this and I'm doing this, and the tensions around that were also very similar. But these are people who, on the surface, you would never think actually had anything to do with each other. Somebody who literally looked like they had not stepped out of the library in all 4 years of college was sitting with a school socialite, and it seemed like they connected just fine. Someone who was in a performing arts group would sit together with someone who was in a cultural group, and they would fit together just fine. And there was really no real bound that seemed too hard to transcend, because at the end of the day, what started happening at tea time was people would be honest. They would be authentic with each other. And what kind of happens when you actually choose to be authentic with each other is a part of you comes out that probably doesn't come out when you're with a large group of people or when you're with people that you quote unquote know. Because when you know people, you kind of have to fit into a bucket of what they understand about you. So it's really, really hard to break out of that mold. And it's really hard to actually be, well, yourself. Which is surprising. You would think that it was so easy to be yourself around people that you understood, but as a matter of fact, it was easiest to be yourself around people that you didn't know. And what would happen at tea time was kind of like an alternate reality. I tried really, really hard to understand why is it that people could be so open, so honest, so authentic, so weird at tea time, and actually have that be accepted and celebrated, kind of the way it was at Model Congress, but it's so difficult to do in our day-to-day lives. And I started realizing that it's because being yourself is a really hard thing to do. Being weird is really, really hard because the second you start doing something that other people don't understand or something that makes sense to you but not anybody else, well, you're going to get challenged. People are going to look at you funny. And there's not actually a standard of what it means to be normal. Because when you're weird, you're actually operating on your own standards. You have to be the one to tell you that you're doing things right, and you also have to be the one that tells you that you're doing things wrong. But if you're fitting to other systems, people will tell you. You'll feel it from other people. So I started working a little more on Tea with Strangers. I didn't know I couldn't figure out the solution, so I figured why not just make tea time happen as much as possible. So since college, Tea with Strangers has grown to being in 10 cities, and we have a few hundred hosts all over the country. And they're hosting tea time every single day, where strangers are sitting together and they're getting an opportunity to just be their authentic selves with one another. But how do you actually take that authentic self outside of tea time and into your day-to-day life? And why would you? Well, let's say that you actually did. Let's say that you actually chose to be yourself around the people around you, and you actually found that they looked at you funny, and you found that it was very, very scary to actually do it because you were consistently finding that people didn't conform to your ideas of yourself. It's uncomfortable. It's definitely not an easy thing to do, but what you start finding is when you choose to be yourself, you also find people that choose to be themselves around you. Because just the same way that it took place at tea time, people would choose to be more authentic with each other because they saw that other people were being authentic with them. They found that you start finding that when you choose to be authentic with the people around you, that they choose to be more authentic with you because they feel the permission to do so. And that's not everybody. There's still going to be people that look at you very funny for doing things that you choose to do on your own accord. But when you actually find the people who accept that and find the people that embrace it and actually see a path for themselves to be more authentic around you, you start surrounding yourself with them and actually creating new norms. And unity is created out of every single person's individuality, which is a little bit paradoxical because everybody ends up being very different, but there's something about the permission to be different that actually brings people together. But the tough part is actually finding those people. But you're not going to find them unless you choose to be one of them yourself. Those communities aren't formed around you unless you actually choose to represent what those communities represent. Because at the end of the day, whenever we want to be ourselves, there's two opportunities. You could either choose to do something different, or you could choose to do the thing that, well, is very followed, the thing that everybody else is doing. And in the system where everybody else is doing it, you'll find a lot of appreciation because everybody else is actually affirming it. But when you choose to do things your own way, people will look at you funny, but then you'll end up finding the people who don't. So the challenge here is try to actually be weird and try to actually be yourself and find the others who will actually accept that and share the weirdness with you. Thank you.